Good afternoon, and I hope you had a good discussion. What was the discussion about? Oh, okay, that's wonderful. Okay, okay, thank you. Yeah. Well, do we have a? Okay, yes. So let's first cultivate refuge and bodhicitta, and then the four immeasurables. While we say this, try to mold the mind into that attitude, have a felt sense of it. At least at that time, kind of do it with as honest way as possible. Every time we do, that's how we'll gain the best benefit from it. And that's how the mind becomes acquainted, familiarized, bit by bit, very little, but over time, one could see the development. But anyway, okay, thank you.
I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment.
Let's sit for a while holding those immeasurables, one at a time, moving from one to the other. In a way, recite the lines mentally, and mind would have no other choice but to focus on it. Let me see what the questions are. When you think of developing bodhicitta, what comes to mind? Do you think this is a realistic aim or not? That's a very, very pertinent question. And if it is not, one has to strive to make it realistic. Just look at the example of Buddha. He got his attainment from developing bodhicitta. And how would it be possible to have earnest attitude of bodhicitta if it were not realistic at all? And how would it be possible to attain the fruits of such a cultivation? What effect has learning about the bodhicitta aspiration had on your life so far? Can you imagine what it might be like to actually exchange the focus on yourself with the mind, heart, totally focus on others? How would that change how you live your life? Wonderful. Just letting the mind into that kind of a thought process and visualization. Even just by doing that also, mind will gather some force of such a cultivation. What steps would you like to take to bring the bodhicitta motivation more deeply into your practice and your everyday life? Yeah, wonderful. And there is a question here. How do bodhicitta and the bodhisattva resolve differ? Bodhicitta become Buddha so you can benefit all, versus bodhisattva resolve. I see. Return to samsara life after life to save all sentient beings. Okay. I first thought by the resolve we were referring to the sixth point. Okay. There's even a saying that bodhisattvas love samsara more than nirvana. But that has to be understood properly. It's not that they do not want to strive for nirvana. Actually, they strive for nirvana multifold stronger than the Shravakas do, because they have an extra reason. It is not being pursued just for themselves, but for entire sentient being. Because the way to becoming fully awakened is through attaining liberation first. If there were to be a way to avoid it, of course, bodhisattvas would take it less. But there's no other way. That's the only way. That's how they pursue it as strong as they do their full awakening, because they hold the sentient beings dearly at their heart. But what about when this saying says they love samsara more than nirvana? They want to serve sentient beings. And that's where you find sentient beings. They are so moved and driven by the kindness of sentient beings in so many ways. And that's something we need to explore also and kind of contemplate a lot. There are so many occasions when His Holiness the Dalai Lama, merely recalling sentient beings, would break down in tears. Very often he would have a hard time holding it back. He would try to hold, and if there would be a moment of silence, pin drop silence, everyone would have noticed it, and he would try to hold it. And then continue from where he had left, slightly noticing the change of the tone. But sometimes he could not stop, but break down. And I have seen Venerable Tenzin Chodrak's one of her former teachers, Sargung Sensei Rinpoche. We had their fortune at the dialectic school to have several occasions of Sargung Sensei Rinpoche's being invited to the dialectic school, and very often it would be occasion of graduation. Then he would preside over the session, and he would address the gathering. In his case, mostly something that I remember is whenever he calls to his mind the kindness and the effort and the dedication of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he could not hold himself back. So it could go that deep only if we dwell much on the kindness of sentient beings. It's not something that we need to look far and hard to find their kindness. right here and now we see the kindness of sentient beings. We are kind of hardened by our self-centered way of thinking, and kind of, despite meeting with the Dharma, it's still almost like so hard for the rock to get wet. And even if it is dipped so hard, in the core it's still dry. Whereas Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, compassion. And that's how we can all become. If only we make effort. Sometimes we may think, oh, I have this family to look after, I have these children to look after. Of course, that's definitely an area that one has to care about. But if we really mean caring for them, we need to rethink how to do that, how to bring that about. How much what we do in the name of caring for them, how far they go. I mean, those are part of it, but it should not stop there. It has to be kind of further. And if we care for our children and family members and dear ones, then we should as well be caring for others, because they affect. Caring others, it would make perfect sense to care for others, other beyond the immediate circle, because that will affect your immediate circle. It's sometimes very kind of shocking to see what actual reality is, other than what we usually take it for granted, and you usually see it to be the custom around. And we look around and say, okay, that's the way to go about, that must be it. That must have been time tested or whatever. But usually that's not. So it's not that they do not want to be liberated. It's not that they do not want to be enlightened. No, it's not that they do not want to attain arhatship, because that's the only way by which they could serve the sentient beings better. So when they say they love samsara more, it's not that they love samsara suffering for themselves. It's by being relieved of it, by being freed of it through following the path that kind of brings a way out of it. By exercising it, seeing it, exercising it, practicing it, and seeing the result on oneself, that one could be even more well equipped in serving sentient beings. Yeah, in one of the texts I even saw this saying that they they make the effort to attain nirvana and full awakening, nirvana on the way to becoming full awakening, much multifold more than those of the arhats. But usually we do not hear about this connection between bodhisattvas and liberation as much. But that's something that they cannot avoid. That's the only way through it. And that's as quick as they can attain the liberation, so quick they could make full awakening. And then, in terms of helping others, in terms of coming to benefit others, they are open to trying all means possible, even including afflictions. Open to employing it, so long as they can come to use, to serve sentient beings. They are open to that. But at the same time, they see very clearly afflictions, without exception, are a hurdle to achieving liberation, to achieving full awakening. So even the means, which would outwardly look like what do you call, embracing the afflictions, are very certain for them to hit back at the afflictions, to counteract the affliction. Although superficially it may not look like, but it is even a stronger force and stronger means to eradicate it. Because they are very clear in terms of what comes in the way of achieving full awakening, achieving liberation, be that for themselves and for others. And thus, they want to be as quickly enlightened via attaining liberation, so that they could serve sentient beings in the best way possible. Yet at the same time, when it comes to the strength, speaking of the strength of their commitment to sentient beings, to serving sentient beings, then they are even willing to spend as much time as needed in samsara before attaining enlightenment, if that could serve the purpose, if that could serve sentient beings more. But there is no way they could do it. But at their, thinking of their strength of will, they are even willing to do that if that could serve. So that's what I thought Norman Fisher may be referring to when he was saying those shocking statements. Okay, so yeah, return to samsara, life after life, to save all sentient beings. In a way, they do so. They return to samsara, not right away in generating, after generating bodhicitta. They take time in training themselves. They take time in they take time in cultivating the qualities in them by which they could gain confidence in their actual serving of the sentient beings. So in terms of coming to samsara, they would definitely not like to do that under the influence of afflictions. So very possibly they may wait until they attain Arya level, and from that time on they are no more subject to the afflictions, subject to afflictions as the driving force behind their samsaric birth. Under the force of compassion, they could choose and be born there. So until then, they would rather focus. They would wish to serve sentient beings, and as will be as encouraged, as motivated to do so, but will be realistic in what needs to be the priority at that time in developing themselves. That's true, nothing but for the sake of sentient beings. So when we hear of them returning to samsara, we usually think of doing that like we do, right? Under the pose of afflictions. Then there would be just mere visual thinking, would not serve. So when it comes to bodhisattvas' prayers, very often many of them would sound totally mind-blowing, and at the same time make us wonder whether that would ever be possible. Some are quite apparent that would not be practical. But when it comes to their mental allowance to do anything for the sake of sentient beings, they would go that far in really imagining and thinking of such weird choices. Could we have the slides up? I think that touches on the question. Now, bodhicitta to become Buddha, so you can benefit all. Bodhisattva resolved to return to samsara life after life to save all sentient beings. So when we speak of returning to samsara life after life, very often that can happen after they attain the Arya level of attainment, and from then on, we don't have to rely on afflictions for their birth, for the force to be born into samsara. Rather, it will be replaced by compassion and their strong motivation in prayer. Those will replace the afflictions in impelling the birth. But very often we hear of and yeah, it's interesting. Even the Buddhas, sometimes we get this sense of once one attains Buddhas, they kind of wait and rest. That's not the case. In a way, at the level of Buddhahood, there's no such thing as having to make any effort. Everything is now spontaneous, effortless. And to a certain extent, we can get the clue for that from the type of mind, and body that they have. Totally, if you could say, made from, arisen from nothing but the subtlest clear light mind and its mount energy. Nothing but that. And those, we could imagine what it would be like. Those are totally unlike the gross mind and body that we are used to thinking of. So Buddhas too come to samsara in so many different ways, different forms. But unlike bodhisattvas, Buddhas don't have to even make any efforts. Just wherever they could serve sentient beings in whatever form they should, and they would arrive. That's why from a Buddhist perspective, whoever is serving you, whoever is benefiting you, we have a way of kind of allowing for that to be at least a Buddha's manifestation for oneself. And thus the reverence to the gurus who serve as the very source from which you happen to be relying on and respecting and trusting on, and they happen to be sharing their dharma through the examples, through teachings, or not. So there's this complete match between the two, by which we say that wouldn't be any other one than the Buddhas. So that doesn't mean that the teacher who individually would actually have to be Buddha. There could be teachers in terms of their individual attainment, those at the ordinary level, of the Arya level, of varying ranges. But in terms of the blessing that one is getting, those could not be seen less than that of a Buddha, because that's the medium through which we could be benefited. Otherwise, if they were to appear, we may not have the support of the merit to be able to access that. Okay, I think. So there is no contradiction between striving to become Buddha and resolving to return to samsara life after life. Because, of course, once one attains full awakening, that could be even done more effectively, more effectively. But then, even before that, when one is pursuing enlightenment, serving sentient beings with that kind of a compassion and wisdom and care would only augment their collection of merit. That would only push them even quicker to full awakening. So there is no contradiction there. Okay. Yeah, let's move on. Next one. Yeah, we'll shortly touch on this. This is another method of cultivating bodhicitta, which is called equalizing and exchanging self and others. And here we will see self-centeredness being kind of exposed, called out here in terms of its disadvantages, and then the cherishing of others as the mindset that we want to replace it with, and then following that, exchanging self and others in that what we cherish most at this time, which is self, and tend to be negligent of others, and to put away or be indifferent or even negligent or sometimes even be hostile to others. That is then brought to become the focus of our cherishing mind. So that's what it's called, exchanging the focus, the focal point of prioritizing and so far we have been prioritizing ourselves over others, and we want to change that to prioritizing others over oneself. But that should not make us think that would mean, in Tibetan we sometimes use this term yevar dorwa, completely discard oneself, but that doesn't mean you kind of beat down upon oneself, beat yourself up and kind of crash oneself, kind of put oneself down. That's not the way, because if what we want is helping others, we need to be as strong and healthy as we can, and in all ways possible, fully fully capable to do that. That means caring for oneself, but caring for oneself not because of who you are, but because of what you can mean to others. So that's where there is a deep change in even in one's attitude towards oneself, even if one is caring after oneself, but there the whole focus and the purpose is very different. So that's why these terms such as cherishing sentient beings, in return discarding oneself, is discarding the how do you call the dictates, the moves of self-centeredness, not discarding oneself as such, but discarding the moves and the designs, the measures of self-centeredness. And thus one would be looking after oneself with the benefit, the welfare of others in the back of one's mind. So again, it would be wonderful to imagine what it would look like, what it would feel like, how the world would be changed. And it would look like, if we transform ourselves to such a way that we cherish others, that we only cherish others, and even caring for ourselves, we always done with the purpose of serving others, then we could see how there would be a massive transformation. It's almost like the world has suddenly changed. Everyone would begin to look to oneself as someone heartwarming, cherishable. And how would that make oneself feel, even at the individual level? But then in terms of how that could mean, what that could mean in really affecting the environment and the conditions of others. Just one toothbrush will be, not toothbrush as such, but just one cup or one thermos would be enough to kind of really serve so many. So it would like if we have 2-3 things, it would be much more abundant than we would need. It's almost like everybody has everything, and that would be on a consistent level. That's just talking of material things, but then more than that would be this constant heartwarming attitudes and sentiments that would be shared among each other. I think then the fifth one is what we usually hear as giving and taking. Tonglen, yeah. Tonglen. And then the sixth one, bodhicitta. I think there should be enough. So here the approach, this particular method of cultivating bodhicitta is considered to be involving much more strength and much more intelligence, much more intelligence and wisdom, and thus it is upheld as more powerful, at the same time more difficult to practice. But when one succeeds in doing so, one will see how the force of it would be much stronger than the previous method. Usually, this line of practice of cultivating bodhicitta is, despite being a method aspect of practice, it is associated with the wisdom lineage. So much of a wisdom, particularly that of emptiness or subtle interdependence, but also including dependent origination of other levels are also employed in this. Yeah, so much of a, revolutionary outlook is involved in this. And almost turning upside down in how one has been, and seeing how there is a unexplored, unexcavated treasure there. If only we could switch the outlook. So next, could we go next? Okay, so here, that's where I was talking of the equanimity. The equalizing of self with others, that was the first point. That's alluding to this equanimity of benevolence. Here, unlike the previous one, where it kind of the actual equanimity practice itself, in the previous one, the actual equanimity practice itself takes the form of kind of maintaining the evenness of the mind, keeping afflictions such as attachment and hatred from kind of being manifest and kind of being a dictating force, but rather kind of maintaining the evenness of the mind, and thus serving as a means by which one could then gradually develop the other cultivations. But here, it's mainly drawing its strength from the fact that everyone wants happiness, do not want suffering. That's the equalizing part of it. And based on that, one then comes out not with an evenness of mind only, where the main where the main strategy is more like not messing up with others in a negative way. But here it is, instead of that, here it is taking a proactive action in meaning to bring joy and happiness to others, instead of just merely kind of keeping from bringing suffering to them through these afflictions of anger and attachment. Instead, one kind of takes this proactive action, proactive means of kind of even deliberately adopting to benefit sentient beings both in short term and long term. We have this expression called Penditubdugi Samjo Ringdung Meba. Both at the mind level, you generate this wish and aspiration to bring joy and happiness both in short term, long term to all sentient beings. But at the same time, when you have developed it, when you come with acting on it, the measures, as just as the mind itself goes equally to all sentient beings in meaning to bring joy and happiness. Likewise, the efforts, the actual, physical and verbal actions as well should be equally reaching out without discrimination. So what that means is, practically one could not do that. One could be just serving someone in need, whatnot. But if at all one were in a position and others were to be in such a need, one would not have any sense of reluctance, any sense of restraint or constraint in the way of doing that. So mentally one would be fully allowing, likewise one would be totally, completely ready to extend that to everyone without any kind of excuses like that. So let's move to the next one. I think this is not too quick. I think people may be already familiar with this. Okay. So again, what is the need? These are the contemplations, right? Contemplations that one could do These are just suggestions, samples, but one could come up with one's own lines that could speak more strongly to oneself, that would be based on one's own experiences and insights, understandings. These are just suggestions. In its absence, we will not abstain from harming others and harboring ill intentions towards others. And we may ask, so what? Because if we do that, we would ourselves be suffering. We would ourselves be let down by these. So there's this need of seeing things more completely than just stopping short with whatever short vision we have of what things do, right? So if we harm others, how do we ourselves get harmed in this return? That part needs to be taught to. And so we bring the loop to the sight of the loop completely, not just kind of get along or go along with the usual understanding. Without abstaining from them. So these are built up. In its absence, we will not abstain from harming others and harboring ill intentions towards others. Without abstaining from them, we will not generate the genuine attitude of exchanging self and others. Failing to generate that, we will not mitigate the attitude of self-centeredness. And failing to mitigate that, there is no way to generate an all-out mind of benefiting others. In its absence, our compassion will never grow to the level of great compassion, and that will induce the resolve to work selflessly for others. So for now, for here, it is all based on others, right? But at the same time, one has to take into consideration how failing to generate each step would come back to oneself, hurting, being hurt. And not only we would keep the demon-like attitude, self-centeredness with us, and thus be continuously enslaved by it. But at the same time, what we wish for in serving other sentient beings, that will not be materialized. So these are stated here with the assumption that one has gained some conviction or some awareness that, yes, some awareness of the value of exchanging self and others, some awareness of the value of great compassion. And only then, by seeing that we will not be able to generate them, will make us feel a sense of loss. Otherwise, if we go by usual think of, oh, great compassion, everything is just merely for others, there's nothing for me, or that serving others has no meaning or no purpose except benefiting them, then we would be at loss in seeing the whole picture. I think those who are interested in kind of having a copy of this, you have this available. So we'll move on. Okay, so you get the sense of what these slides are getting at, and so that, and if people have questions, then please raise questions as we go along. So the equanimity of benevolence, the way to develop that, this is a particular method that His Holiness the Dalai Lama received from one of his senior tutors, late tutors, Japji Chijang Rinpoche. And it seems like there's used to be, or there still is, kind of a secretly passed method of generating this attitude of equalizing self and others, called Kajama. Kajama is kind of something that is kept from going into public for fear that it might be misunderstood and misused, and might be people might misuse and misunderstand it. So that's the term we usually use for anything of that kind. Kajama means something that has the seal, that bears the seal, and that only when we want to open it, the seal should be broken. Until then, that's what it is meant to be sealed, been sealed. So His Holiness shares that when Chicha Rinpoche taught this, he also shared that this is very similar to what this, what do you call, what's the usual term? What's the usual term when you have a government declaration which will be held for the right time to arrive? Not embargoed. Is it? Yeah, somewhat like that. Yeah. So he shared His Holiness saying that this is very similar to what this practice of bodhicitta, practice associated with bodhicitta, the sealed practice is about. And there's not so much of a difference in it. But from that, it becomes clear that it's not the same thing, one and the same thing. Anyway, this is interesting. So there are three sets of three considerations. Although we are just going through them quickly, right? But the main thing is to take time in really delving deep into them and kind of thinking through them and rallying, shoring up the strength of these statements to the point that one gets moved. And if we do that again and again and again, then our mind gets slowly but gradually shaped by them. So, three considerations on behalf of others. Others are equal in wanting happiness and not wanting suffering. There is no difference in sentient beings in this regard. So there is no reason why we should be discriminatory in treating them. Others are equal in being bereft of happiness, although they may desire it. You can see how this is built. This is taken from the first one into two, the next two lines. Others are equal in being bereft of happiness, although they may desire it. Others are equal in being constantly tormented by suffering, though they may shun it. When we say constantly, we may wonder, how could this be the case? We are constantly, so long as we are in samsara, we are constantly held in the jaws of the afflictions. The moment we lose awareness, mindfulness, we would be bitten by the jaw of the afflictions. That's what our situation is, in the jaw of the afflictions. Rooted, so strong jaws that are rooted, backed up by ignorance, unflinching, unwavering, very well built, grounded ignorance in us. And then this physical body of ours itself is so vulnerable. It's so vulnerable. It doesn't take any much for it to be hurt, for it to be affected. And then even without that also, in a natural process, we are in this process of degeneration, decaying into our old age, and we can see how feeble the body itself is. Because when we say we are in this life or in particular form or particular realm, that means we are always with our body. The body within samsara, impelled by afflictions and the actions induced by them, they are as dukkha in nature. So that's how we can think more deeper in terms of how constantly we are tormented by suffering. Because from a Buddhist perspective, the suffering of pervasive conditioning, the pervasive conditioning of being constantly held in the jaws of the afflictions and constantly shaped by, constantly held by the afflictions and their subtle dispositions, means that we are constantly submerged in the dukkha of pervasive conditioning. And that is a very ripe ground for all other, more gross sufferings to come. And let's move to the next one. So when we do that, at the end of it, or at the end of each of these contemplations, one then comes to the conclusion that yes, that there is no point, there's no sensibility. It makes no sense in discriminating amongst the sentient beings. Instead, I should be more encouraged in bringing joy and happiness. In the Tibetan usage of the term pende, they are used to refer to joy and happiness, both one in short term and the other in full long term. Between the two, the whole range of the whole range of time is covered. So that's how when we say that when we resolve to kind of bring joy and happiness, that's covering both short-term and long-term needs of sentient beings in bringing joy and happiness to them. So at the end of each line, or at the end of the third one set, one could then take time in resolving, in feeling convinced that yes, they do not deserve any discrimination. Instead, they are as wanting for joy and happiness, as deserving for joy and happiness. Thus, I should be delivering on it. So that's what the equalizing self and others take the form of at the end of each session. So although it is called equalizing, but it is kind of culminates in this attitude of wishing to bring joy and happiness, not just wishing, kind of seeing that yes, that they definitely deserve joy and happiness. They definitely deserve to be treated in such a way that I could bring joy and happiness to them, and totally, completely rule out any discriminatory treatment, any discriminatory way of relating to them. So then this one is the second one. First one was considering one's own on one's own behalf. This is on behalf of others. This is considering on one's own behalf. I think the first one should read, I have been benefited by all sentient beings without exception. Is it? I say, okay, yeah, you're right. I was reading it in Tibetan. Yes, I have benefited from all sentient beings without exception. And that should cover not just this life, but throughout the lifetimes that we have been through. And taking clue from our own condition right in this life by being very practical to how one gets by, then how one survives and how one prospers, how that's all completely due to the kindness of others. I remember Venerable saying, we are zero at birth, something like that, right? We are zero at birth. We have nothing in terms of our capability, talent, etc. at birth. But whatever we gain over time, those are all through the kindness, through the assistance of others. And then when we extend it to lifetimes, and that can be much more expensive, much more extensive. So here, the main important thing is, I have benefited from all. See if we could at all exclude even a single sentient being. We cannot do that with assurance, with full certainty. We cannot do that. And even in this very life also, when we think of animals and whatnot, the connection is there, and we are benefiting either directly or indirectly when we think of the way the ecosystem works and all of those. And then we can see how even sentient beings, tiny creatures and whatnot, even they have a hand in our conditions. I could benefit from them even when they are hostile to me. So even that is even not an exception. When they are hostile to oneself, when I say hostile, that basically boils down to having a hostile attitude. From there, then their actions will be aligned with that, and based on that, we can unmistakenly call them to be our enemies. So that's not to rule out their being enemy, but the very fact that they are enemy, by virtue of their having the hostile attitude, unmistaken hostile attitude towards us, that makes them this very special object from whom we can benefit in a very, very unique way. Particularly, we speak of the cultivation of patience or tolerance. Very often we suffer from the lack of that. And the strength of this tolerance and patience, endurance, is something that we can generate, learn from our dealings with our adversaries. And unlike any other objects, the way they serve the way they serve in building our strength of tolerance, patience, which would come so handy and which would come of so much use when one pursues whatever spiritual awakening one is pursuing, particularly the Bodhisattva ideal of pursuing full awakening. Patience kind of runs through all their practices, be that generosity, ethics, concentration, wisdom, joyous effort. In all of these, patience is needed. It's almost like an inseparable component of that. And that strength of patience can be learned in the face of adversities, and thus so valuable they are. Then the last one is, I am anitya, I'm impermanent, I'm in the nature of suffering, I'm empty of any intrinsic selfhood, or maybe shunya here is, I'm empty of being made of pure components, pure body, pure aggregates. And then the last one is atma, anatman, that I do not have any intrinsic selfhood like others. So that means we see in each other the wretchedness of samsaric conditioning. That is all all consuming us, right? And through that we see, when we see everyone in a turmoil, in a particular problem, then we begin to bond with each other and kind of keep ourselves from taking issues with them, but rather kind of bond with them and empathize with them. So it's the same idea here in seeing our basic underlying wretched condition in the samsara by way of being permanent, dukkha in nature, shunya and anatma. And again, like before, at the end of this contemplation, I mean, you are all aware, when we do these contemplations, they should be kind of looked deep into and and be kind of shored up with all kinds of perspectives and reasonings and experience and all of that, so that it could build the strength in kind of really living some kind of impact on one's mind. And when we do that on a regular basis, we could begin to see how, over time, we will see how one's natural reaction natural reaction would also have changed. And that's because of this bit by bit change over time when we undertake this on a regular basis. And then the third one, the next one. Yeah, this additional consideration, usually we hear this to be consideration from the perspective of ultimate truth, but in the way His Holiness teaches, the first two are not necessarily done through the perspective of ultimate truth or perspective of emptiness, because the truth of them is as valid on the conventional level, and the truth of them is as valid on a conventional level. So only even on the conventional level also we can kind of verify the truth of it without having to resort to the ultimate perspective. So if there is anyone truly worth hating, Buddha should see it, but he does not. And that's kind of referring to the Buddha's unmistaken omniscience, Buddha's unmistaken understanding of things. If at all there is someone who could be totally unmistaken in whatsoever all the time, it would be Buddha. Not that he was like this for all the time, but through his effort, through his trainings, he has now arrived at such a state of being where there's not the slightest chance of ever being mistaken. And that's what we are, banking on by saying, if at all someone were to be worth hating, if at all there is someone who is exceptional in being worthy of being hated, then Buddha should have seen it, but he doesn't. And now we could ask how he doesn't see it. How do we know? Then we resort to scriptural evidences, scriptural lines where he rather holds the afflictions in the sentient beings as something to blame, as enemies, but not the sentient beings themselves. Their afflictions are the enemies, both to their affliction, both to the sentient beings, as well as in the eyes of this Buddha, you could say, but not the sentient beings, not whatsoever their condition may be. And then the second one is, one could wonder that, does that mean that on a conventional level there is no such thing as friends, enemies, and neutral beings? And it's saying that no, on a conventional level we are validly, perfectly unmistaken in seeing beings in these three categories. Although there's categories, in these three categories, there's nothing wrong with that. However, such categorization is not fixed and permanent. It always shift. It's not something kind of intrinsic in and of themselves. Of course, we do not necessarily bring that. It's not something fixed and permanent that would always say like that, but rather they could keep changing, and thus kind of ruling out the emotional investment in treating them differently. The third one, this is where the perspective of ultimate truth ultimate reality is brought in here, saying there are self and others, but self and others are not intrinsically fixed, intrinsically inherent, but rather merely contingent on conditions and and thus kind of making our sense of fast and fixed categorization and fast and fixed, grasping onto oneself and others in those very distinct, clear-cut, kind of unconnected forms that is being exposed, that is being kind of poked hole into. These are quite elaborate and quite marvelous tools to kind of utilize and explore and deepen, and that can really bring over time a change in oneself, in how we see and treat others. Let's move to the next one. Yeah, now comes self-centeredness. Let's take some time here in understanding what is self-centeredness, whether we have that or not, and what are its roles, what are the damages that it creates. These are two quotations from Shantideva, where I think, among many, from where we get some sense of what self-centeredness might be. If I give this, what shall I have left to enjoy? Such selfish thinking is the way of ghosts. If I enjoy this, what shall I have left to give? Such selfless thinking is a quality of gods. So very clearly we see a link between selfishness and selflessness. But when we use these terms in different cultural contexts, sometimes they can have different connotations, and thus it's far better to stick to calling it self-centeredness instead of selfishness, because from the usage it seems to kind of matter hugely in terms of how it could be taken. So from the first, and I think from the second also, if I employ others for my own purposes, I myself shall experience servitude. But if I use myself for the sake of others, I shall experience only lordliness. This is more dwelling on the benefits of it. But the first one is more on the nature of self-centeredness and cherishing others. So here, whereas in the other one, in the next one, in the second stanza, it seems to dwell more on the outcome of engaging in self-centeredness, or that of cherishing others. So in the first one, it seems like self-centeredness, as I see there, seems to have something to do with prioritizing oneself over others. But then when we extend it, when we kind of look closely, not every time we have self-centeredness necessarily has to kind of come in this well-pronounced or well-pronounced sense of priority. Sometimes it could be implicit, yet at the same time, self-centeredness could be as much in action. By that, what I mean is, when we look how pervasive it is, it seems like every time we engage in negative action in relation to others, it seems like, at least to me, it's open for discussion or for reflection. But at least for me, it seems like all of our negative actions are supported by self-centeredness. The reason why we inflict sufferings on others is clearly a sense of who you prioritize, oneself or the others. Otherwise, if one had a totally different priority sense, then one would not jump into engaging in negative actions vis-a-vis others. So my welfare is more important than yours. My freedom is more important than yours. And based on that, we kind of feel justified in engaging in those negativities. And what does negative actions do? Even in the here and now, they have very damaging effect. But from a karmic understanding, their damages even extend far beyond this life. It's quite telling when we say the Lama Chopa, the Guru Puja practice. I have written it down, and I heard His Holiness the Dalai Lama saying that and explaining it in a way that made me think that yes, behind every negative action, there is a self-centeredness. Now the thing is to explore whether its reach even go beyond that. So in the Lama Chopa, in the Guru Puja that we have a copy of, and we do the puja every twice every month, right? Twice every month. There's this knowing that this chronic disease of self-centeredness is the cause of my unwanted suffering. Inspire me to put blame where it is due and vanquish the great demon of self-centeredness. The reference to it as chronic disease, in the way in Tibetan when we use this, chongne, is a debilitating disease. Because of that, one would have lost immunity and thus be very vulnerable to catching any disease. So that is quite descriptive of how when we are self-centered, when we prioritize ourselves over others, it's like we are much more ripe to suffer, to be affected adversely by just about any conditions. So if we care so much about ourselves, we begin to see everything happening, everything being proposed in terms of how it will affect me. How it will affect me. And thus our perspective to that would be very confined, and this risk, and this ripe risk of being hurt easily by just about anything. So it's like a chronic disease or a debilitating disease during which one doesn't have any strong immunity, that any mild condition can affect oneself. And it's the cause of unwanted suffering. Cause of unwanted suffering, how would we understand that? In a way, it seems to suggest that, yes, self-centeredness is as fundamental as self-grasping. And how it is pervasive behind all of our misdeeds. And because of that, it's almost like the directing force behind all of the afflictions and the actions induced by them. And because of that, we suffer. We are plagued by the sufferings. Another one says, self-centeredness is the doorway to all torment. Although, yeah, in this regard, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, take our life, take our present life, whatever downfalls, whatever low situations, damages and hurt that we feel, those are all supported by self-centeredness. When we think of our sufferings in the lower realms, those are caused by self-centeredness, in that they have backed us in indulging in the afflictions and the negative actions, and thus the result. And even considering the achievement of liberation by the Shravakas and Prateka Buddhas, even that kind of achievement, which is to be revered and celebrated, yet the best of the products that the self-centered can bring, even that has some what do you call? Even that has some shortages, some shortcomings. In that, one would be very complacent with that kind of achievement, to the point of kind of keeping oneself aloof from others. So it's like, and then kind of indulging in that kind of a self-liberation for very, very long time, without being of much service in the truest sense to one's mother sentient beings. But then to get self-centeredness to take us to such an achievement, it's not that easy coming, because we usually align a self-centeredness with our negativity, and negativity is what we find self-centeredness most involved in. If we kind of think carefully and then use self-centeredness and put its attention right in terms of what really comes in our way of joy and happiness, and find fault with afflictions, then only then self-centeredness could serve as some way productive, although with limitations. But in most of the cases, self-centeredness kind of aligns with our negativities, and thus we end up accumulating negative actions, and that will then result in the sufferings. So His Holiness kind of says that, be that in this life, in the next life, in lower realms, and even be that attaining individual liberation, self-centeredness has always a kind of a limiting factor in it, if not a damaging factor. But there would always be a shortcoming. Because from a perspective of Bodhisattva, being kind of finding oneself in a what they call that, we call it one-sided liberation, but sometimes I have seen Venerable refer to it as dry liberation, something, dry arhatship, something like that. So from a Bodhisattva's perspective, that would be a huge loss of, a huge waste of energy, and kind of really a mismatch between how much effort you put in to what you get, and what that means in terms of losing out on a much bigger way of being, in being available to all sentient beings. So it is interesting to see, to recognize, identify self-centeredness within us. And as I said earlier, it could be very apparent when we have faced with a choice, and we kind of side with ourselves or others. That's a priority. But then very often, even without such a pronounced thought within us, when we allow ourselves kind of in engaging in negativities, whatnot, it seems like there is a very strong force of self-centeredness in it, and that means its influence is so widespread. And then, most of all, it is the one only hurdle in generating this big heart of bodhicitta, and that is a massive damage or massive hurt that it brings. So bodhisattvas seem to be most worried about self-centeredness sneaking in, and they kind of consider it is the number one affliction, the number one adversary or adversity, because even self-grasping could be employed on the path, but in the eyes of the bodhisattvas, self-centeredness is the most damaging element, because of what they aspire to achieve. That's the number one hurdle, number one obstacle. So it is helpful to see, if we first identify self-centeredness within us, although I'm still kind of open to define self-centeredness, to even bringing it further into not just prioritizing, sometimes even just the very care for oneself seems to be, at least from a bodhisattva's perspective, a waste of energy, not getting anywhere, because that's what we have been doing all along. Has not gotten us anywhere, irrespective of whether it is in that very pronounced, putting down others and picking oneself up. But the very fact, of kind of going by one's business, as they say, minding one's business, even that seems to be quite limiting. And not just quite limiting, that's very limiting. That's what we have gotten us around and round and round, and not get anywhere. Can we move a few slides? Okay, this is good. This is something that I took straight from book 5 of our volume 5 of the library. These are some of the disadvantages. While pretending to look out for our welfare, in fact, it constricts our open-heartedness and potential. Just about anything we do not have to change what we do, but if only we could bring a shift in forward, then that can make a big difference, and self-centeredness comes in the way of doing that. Everything becomes a waste of energy if it is just done for oneself. If the same thing is done for the purpose, directly or indirectly, with that sense of care for others, then that makes it a big difference. And speaking from the merits accumulated from that would be also as different. But then in terms of one's own immediate feeling and generating a sense of purpose of life, if one could do that the whole life, and at the time when we are about to say goodbye and we look back, we would feel the life is well used, well lived. Otherwise, if one has just merely, no matter whatever positions and powers one may have, if one has just merely focused on oneself, because we could do that even while being seen as doing public service and whatnot. There could always be a string attached to how it would serve me and whatnot. Then that would become nothing but a manifestation of self-centeredness. And to that extent, the benefit, the actual benefit of that would be much, much limited. So if one were to look back and see if all those were done ultimately for one's own purpose, then where would that leave us? Next, please. Yeah, it adds to our existing pain by feeling sorry for ourselves, blaming others for our problems. Yeah, blaming others for our problems is also a very clear indication of self-centeredness being at the helm. Whereas if we care for the well-being of others, then the perspective that we have towards others and towards their actions will be much more different. It may be the same thing, same action that they are engaging in, but in terms of how we take that, it will be very, very different. It will make a marked difference. Can we go to the next one? Our problems and turmoil in samsara are the results of our own destructive actions, which are supported by self-centeredness. Yes, so I found this also. Our destructive actions. So there is this need of seeing the connection between destructive actions and self-centeredness. It's more like self-centeredness is behind them, kind of pushing them, driving them. With like by the force of self-centeredness, it lends us to engaging in generating and indulging in the afflictions that in turn lead to the negative actions and that to the sufferings here and after, right? And then next one, please. It pollutes our spiritual practice by making us seek worldly gains for ourselves. Yeah, self-centeredness, when it is not that well informed about how to bring about actual self-welfare, then very often it could be naively jumping to very short-sighted visions of life, and also very unbecoming means to serve it. Could we go to the next one? All the problems we experience in samsaric existence are tied to our self-preoccupation. So that again goes back to the afflictive actions, afflictive emotions, and the destructive actions induced by them. Next, please. Yeah, that's what Venerable is referring to. His Holiness is referring to in the book. It is responsible for our resting complacently in nirvana and relinquishing the commitment to lead others to full awakening. I think there's another slide behind that. Yes, this is again from the book. It is the same. These are misconceptions about self-centeredness. It is the same as seeking the well-being of oneself. That's one thing that I have a question. I'm even ready to go to that, because that's what we have been doing all along, and that's what we have. And we see, we know where we find ourselves. If instead that we are to be replaced by cherishing others, the story would have been much different. So I'm open to saying yes, it is the same as seeking the well-being of oneself. Although one could seek the well-being of oneself for the purpose of others, that's different. But if it is done for one's own purpose, for one's own selfish purpose, then that's what I'm alluding to. So in a way, seeking one's well-being for oneself, or seeking the well-being of oneself could go both ways. either for one's purpose, for others' purpose. But it is for one's selfish purpose. And that's very limiting. We cannot say there's something. Of course, when we say self-centeredness, we aren't speaking of anything negative. Self-centeredness is not even a non-virtuous action, non-virtuous thought. It is not even negative. It can be positive. It can be virtuous. If at all, at the very least, neutral, but never negative. I would say that. Pardon? No, it is not the mental factor. It could be called, it could be the whole package. It's the whole package of mind and mental factors. It's not necessarily mind or not necessarily mental factor. Like we speak of self-grasping. Self-grasping is neither mental factor nor mind only. But then the others are quite okay. Yeah. So I must take back my statement, saying I'm even going to that. Or rather, I meant seeking the well-being of oneself for one's own benefit. That is self-centeredness. Not that there's anything negative about it, or only it is limiting, and it will not get us far. Because if we only follow that and keep doing it all the time, we would still find ourselves in samsara. So that's what I was picking at. One must neglect oneself to counteract self-centeredness. That's again another mistake, misconception. That's a very apparent misconception. So that's why I was emphasizing on saying self-centeredness isn't even a negative thought. It's just a limiting, very what do you call narrow-minded way of seeing. An experience of happiness is a sign of being self-centered. Yeah, that's again a misconception. One could be enjoying good health, one could be enjoying good relationships, whatnot, yet at the same time be not swayed by self-centeredness. Of course, when we speak of self-centeredness in this en bloc way, it could be mistaken as something that we either have or not have, but that's not the case. We kind of go about kind of bringing the change slowly and slowly and slowly. So there's not such thing as whether in or not. So it's a gradual process. And that part has to be kept in mind. The only way to sincerely care for others is to suffer oneself. Usually people think, oh, you do not love me because you do not suffer from my suffering. So sometimes we have this kind of a cultural understanding, and that can be very misleading. So there's this need of really thinking through it very carefully and kind of understanding, coming to a very balanced understanding or a realistic, true understanding of what it is, and then bring the change in ourselves bit by bit. Let's see what's the next one. Okay, then I think we're good. I was thinking of sharing the whole. We already up. I was thinking of using this session mainly on self-centeredness. So bashing self-centeredness. This is really a very valuable insight into our life, and if we can spend time in thinking about this and kind of exploring it more, digging deeper and deeper, and bring about, through the force of those insights, if we could bring about slowly but gradual change in kind of shifting to more other-oriented perspective, other-oriented attitude. I think that could really bring very meaningful change for oneself and for others. And then likewise, if everyone were to kind of join in this, the whole world will be a different place. Yes. Oh.
You don't have to answer today. I mean, you can do it tomorrow. Could you talk a little bit about self-centeredness versus self-care, and how do we differentiate?
I think I said that if you care only for yourself, that's self-centeredness still.
But you say only, but how do you then differentiate? Because the instinct, what it's based on is the same. They're coming from the same source.
Which one?
Like self-care versus, when you're self-centered.
Yes, self-care could come with a sense of concern and responsibility towards others. One could be taking care of oneself with the purpose that you can serve others better. In a way, one could do just about anything that we do under the force of self-centeredness with this shift. That will be revolutionary. You don't have to change doing what you do, but only a perspective change shift that we bring in to really enrich our life. So one doesn't really have to worry about what's the difference between self-care and this. I mean, just keep doing it, but bringing this shift of how this could benefit, affect, and others. Then one could be as much caring and at the same time as much growing. Okay, I think we spent the time. Pardon?
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami.
Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious body-mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no